Sanbonani, good evening, Dumelang, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. If you're watching us for the first time, where have you been? Welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you with us. And of course, to our regular viewers, from the Top Fan Gang members to those of you who are watching us on Instagram or YouTube, welcome back to the premier property podcast in South Africa. And of course, for the newbies, you've probably missed out on some great episodes that we've brought onto your screens. Make sure that you go back and watch some of the great content that we have brought on your screen. And talking about great content, one of the other things that we love doing here at Private Property is, of course, making sure that we make your home buying, home owning journey as simple, seamless, and certainly as pleasure-filled as possible. It is one of those things that can be very daunting, and we want to make sure that we are there with you every step of the way. And one of the ways that we do that is, of course, not only with this podcast that comes to your screens every single weekday at 7 p.m., but we also bring you the First-Time Home Buyers Show that comes every Wednesday at 7:45, where we take you on a journey of buying that first property. It can be such a daunting experience, and I'm sure a lot of you probably feel as though you don't know where you're coming and going because of the 1,000,001 decisions that you have to make. Well, that show certainly helps make the journey that much easier for you. And for people who have got those green fingers and are probably exploring agriculture, I know that one of the things that lockdown has done for so many people is bring out those green fingers and starting your little veggie garden. And you now might be thinking, how do I make sure that I scale this as much as possible? Well, the Farming Podcast is for you. So make sure that you tune in every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. where Umbalu brings you some of the best in what you can certainly expect when it comes to all things agriculture. And we never forget about you over the weekend. Chad brings you some of the best estates that the country has on offer on the Developers Show. So if you're still undecided about where to move into, you certainly want to make sure that you hear from the developers' mouth about what some of their developments have on offer. And a show that we're very excited to bring. It's more of a webinar that we're bringing onto your screens next week at 8 p.m. So every day next week at 8 p.m., you can look forward to Building Stronger Homes, brought to you by PPC. And that is going to be a great one if you're certainly looking at, building your home from scratch, or perhaps doing any kind of renovations and want to understand from experts around some of the decisions that you're going to have to make. So do make sure that you have your finger on the pulse on all your property matters. And of course, follow us across all our social media platforms. You can also follow myself on @zamantongwa_K. Now, this evening's conversation, as we're winding up the year, one of the things that we, of course, want to be doing is have a reflection of the year in property. And we're very, very proud to actually have somebody who's quite an expert in this one. And we are going to be looking at the 2020 property year in review with Pam Golding Properties. And I'll be in conversation with Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the Chief Executive of the Pam Golding Property Group. Andrew, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Andrew, and Pam Golding Properties is certainly a household name for so many people, regardless of where you actually are in South Africa. I mean, I'm in Joburg, so I typically tend to even see some of the posters in some of the areas where you're in. So I'm sure a lot of people at home definitely know what Pam Golding is because we've seen it on our screens. And I think one of the big things is that it's not just in South Africa. We know that you're also in other markets. I think one of the big questions as we look at 2020, so many things have happened. Coronavirus came rather unexpectedly, affected different markets, affected different industries in different ways. Then you see how South Africa, was adapting and dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and putting various measures in place to make sure that we, are as least affected as possible. And I think one of the big things then that happened was, of course, we had that hard lockdown earlier on in the year, the country slowly starting to open up. But of course, the property sector had not opened up, in the early stages. Perhaps if you can share with our viewers at home, around your reflections when you look at the property sector in South Africa, especially this year, some of the activities that we've seen, perhaps some of the unexpected things that came up, certainly from a Pam Golding perspective.
Yes, I think the year started normally pre-COVID, and we were in the environment that we found ourselves in. We had plans in place to tackle what we thought was a normal market. COVID arrived and everything got turned on its head, and we needed to try and draw a conclusion as to what the market was going to be like post lockdown and in this new COVID environment. We initially had a view that the market would be significantly affected post lockdown, and to our surprise, and I think to everyone's surprise, the market came out extremely strongly. I think everyone thought that that was just pent up demand, but it soon became apparent that it wasn't just pent up demand, and in fact, it had a whole number of other dynamics to it, and that has essentially continued to today, where we've seen an extremely strong market, particularly in the under 3 million rand category, and especially in the 1 to 2 million rand category, where I think influenced primarily by the lower interest rate environment, we've seen a huge activity. We've seen properties really being sold very quickly at correct asking prices in that market, and almost a seller's market, which was completely different to the market that we were expecting, where we thought that most of the influence would be from buyers. But in the market where there's been affordability as a consequence of the low mortgage rates, we've seen a very active market. But above 3 million, we've seen almost an opposite market, and a market that has been characterized by one that is in the favor of buyers. Prices have been under pressure, and where the market has been much less buoyant. So, a lot of things have been unexpected, but probably that, in terms of activity, has been the greatest one. There have been a number of interesting trends and influences that I think have materialized as a consequence of COVID. But certainly in terms of the property industry relative to other industries, I think we've got a lot to be grateful for, because there are many industries that have been put on their knees as a consequence of COVID. And so far, we've been really fortunate. I'm sure we're going to get to a conversation about what next year is going to look like, but certainly in terms of this year, the way that it was looking in March, we were preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. And I think certainly we've seen pretty much close to the best in terms of what the outcome has been so far.
Andrew, you're probably one of the few guests who've positioned this as a seller's market. If anything, everybody has been saying the other side, that it's a buyer's market. We're seeing historically lower interest rates. But as you say, if in the event where you are a seller, when your property is priced right, it's not going to stay in the market for long. I think, if anything, we're probably seeing that a lot of the sellers want to price it higher than it probably should be, because they are thinking, well, buyers can afford it because of the low interest rates. So that's probably a tip to the sellers out there. It is your market, because there is demand for property right now, and we've seen it even with the various guests that we've had on. So do make sure that your properties are priced right, because I think that's one of the big things that's going to ensure that your property is going to sell as well as possible. Now, Andrew, one of the things that you mentioned is around some of the trends and influences that we're seeing due to COVID. Perhaps take us through some of the trends that you've certainly seen. I see a lot of articles, for example, coming up about how the future of the workspace is very different from probably where we're going right now. What have been your observation about some of the trends over the past few months because of COVID?
Yeah, so I think the work from home initiative that we've seen as a consequence of primarily the lockdown initially, and then as a consequence of that, the ongoing change in the dynamic around the work environment, has led to a couple of significant property changes and trends and influences. So I think the first is that the coastal towns and other destinations outside of the metros have benefited from the fact that people have said, well, look, I can work from anywhere. And as a consequence of that, where do I want to live? And so that has opened up a significant change in towns, particularly coastal towns and other parts of the country, which were not seen as primary work destinations, and where people have said, well, look, I want to go and live there from a lifestyle point of view, and I can now work there. So I think that has been one of the most significant trends. I think we've also seen the leisure destinations become not pure leisure destinations. So coastal towns like Plettenberg Bay, Hermanus, Kenton, those sorts of Eastern Cape holiday towns have certainly benefited from these new work from home trends. I think also what we've seen is that the mortgage market has allowed people who were primarily renting and who in their own minds didn't believe that they could purchase, have a look at the low mortgage interest rate environment and say, but hold on, I think I can now get my first foot on the property ladder it's something that I've always wanted to do. I didn't think I can afford it, but now I can, based purely on comparing what they're paying with a rental with the mortgage costs. And that's probably been the most significant influencer in our market. It's, as a consequence, allowed first-time home buyers on a significant level to get into the market. That's had the effect of pushing everyone up the property ladder as a consequence of pressure from the bottom. And there's no doubt that to the extent that the low mortgage rate interest rates maintain, that's going to be probably the most significant and meaningful impact that this COVID situation has had on the property market. So I think those are probably two of the most significant trends we've seen. We've also seen people, as a consequence of changes in work environment, potentially losing jobs, needing to downscale, and that's created some opportunities in the property market. But at the same time, we've seen people saying, well, if I'm going to work from home, I can't work sustainably from the lounge or the dining room. I need some more space. And therefore, it makes sense for me now not to go into the office, but in fact to change where I live and to in fact buy a bigger home, which has the opportunity of a study or a place where I can in fact work from on a permanent basis. And so we've seen that situation materializing in some of the markets as well.
You know, Andrew, I want to stay with the, with the first-time home buyers, because this is one of those segments that we tend to find that are the biggest, buyers in terms of obviously their first property. And one of the big things is we find that it's millennials who are the biggest sort of first-time home buyers right now. So it's adults under the age of, I think, between the ages of 20 to about 38, who are accessing that property space for the first time. Some of them probably weren't able to access it because of perhaps interest rates or whatever the particular reasons were. If you were to give any tips to first-time home buyers right now who are looking to enter the property space, what would you say to them? Because as I was saying earlier, buying that first property can be such a daunting and overwhelming experience. And more often than not, you end up learning things retrospectively, as opposed to first finding out everything you need to know firsthand, which is why we have shows just like this, as well as the First Time Home Buyers Show, to help viewers at home to better understand what the process is going to be like. So certainly from your perspective, millennial first-time home buyers, what tips would you give them to help them best navigate buying that first property?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is to take one's time, particularly as a first-time home buyer. I think do as much homework as possible, educate yourself as much as you possibly can about the process, and then critically align yourself to a professional who you trust and who you are prepared to put your trust into, and who is going to shepherd you through all of the issues that are associated with buying one's first home. It may seem like a simple process, but in fact, the buying of property is a very nuanced and multifaceted transaction. And if you're doing it for the first time, almost certainly you will benefit from expert help. And so my first and last advice would be to find a property professional or a company in whom you can place your trust and who can assist you in essentially holding your hand through the process of acquiring the property, successfully acquiring the property, and then making sure that the ownership is done in the correct way. I think one's also got to be cautious about acknowledging that if you are buying for the first time, the probabilities that you're going to need a mortgage, a bond, and to the extent that you are going to commit yourself to a 20-year agreement with a financial institution, you need to take a view on that length of time and be prepared to ensure that you're able to deal with the ups and downs, because no market ever just continually goes down and no market just continually goes up. And so as a consequence, you need to predict and acknowledge and anticipate that there are going to be changes in interest rates at some stage in the life cycle of that property, and be prepared to weather that storm. So I think one's got to certainly have a longer term view than just the immediate purchase opportunity that may be right in front of you.
And it's probably one of the harder things to do, Andrew. I mean, I typically joke here on the podcast that the relationship that you enter into with your financial institution when you buy your home is very likely going to be the longest relationship that you might find yourself in. So you want to put as much thought into it as possible and understand what you're signing. Because I think it is one of those things that by the time you're signing with the attorneys, with the bond registration attorneys, you're probably so over the admin that you're just signing without reading and comprehending what it is that you're signing. So really walking the path with a professional who's going to help you along the journey becomes such an important thing to do as a viewer at home or somebody who's looking to buy that first property. We're going to go for a quick break, and I want to hear from you at home. We are looking at the 2020 property year in review with Pam Golding Properties. If you have any questions for Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the Chief Executive at the Pam Golding Property Group, do let us know. I think one of the big things that I also want to hear from him, and we did touch on later, is probably a forecast into the new year and what we can or cannot expect. And I like that question because I know some of our viewers almost want us to, almost look into a crystal ball and say, listen, interest rates are going to stay as they are for this long, or they're going to go down further. This is the time to buy. Fortunately, it doesn't quite work out like that, but we can certainly have, a few forecasts when we look at the property trends for the new year. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 168 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This evening, we're looking at the 2020 property year in review, and we're doing it with Pam Golding Properties. And my guest is Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the Chief Executive of the Pam Golding Property Group. And we really are exploring where we've been in the property sector in the past year, but also looking at the future. I think one of the big things that we pride ourselves in, of course, is being able to anticipate where the market may potentially go and making sure that you safeguard your property portfolio as much as possible and start planning for the year ahead. I think it is December. Many people are slowly starting to plan for the new year, slowly starting to establish where would they want to buy in the event where they want to buy, whether you're looking to change your primary residence or perhaps add on to your property portfolio. But before we get to some of the forecasts for the 2021 year, we certainly also love hearing from you. What are some of your property goals for the new year? I'd like to hear that one. Do share with us what some of the property goals are for the new year and how you want to be using some of what you've learned on this podcast to make sure that you meet your goals. Now, Andrew, I think one of the very big things, I've known the Pam Golding Properties name for the longest time. And I think it is one of those that I was saying earlier, it's a household name in the property space. And more often than not, if you've been looking for a house or any kind of property for that matter, you've probably encountered Pam Golding Properties in one way or another. And I'm certainly interested to know, because it is one of those brands that has gone beyond South Africa. We see it now in different markets. I think sometimes even when you think of luxury accommodation in other markets, you almost always going to be thinking Pam Golding. What is Pam Golding Properties' growth philosophy? To be able to go from being sort of the South African real estate company and now have a very global presence. What informs the growth perspective of the organization?
So we're primarily a South African company, and very proudly so, but we do have international aspirations, and those aspirations start really on the African continent. So we would like to be the property services provider of choice throughout the African continent. We're in 15 different countries at the moment and see ourselves very much as a South African and African company. And really our mission and our goal is to be able to provide South Africans and Africans with property opportunities throughout the continent, but then outside of the continent as well, and to be the property services provider of choice for all clients in terms of property diversification opportunities around the globe, really, both in terms of residential, commercial, and any other kind of property. So we'd like to offer that kind of service across the board, primarily around growth aspirations we have on the African continent. And then within South Africa, we want to continue to provide the kind of service that we have over the last 45 years, which looks to a level of service excellence and service offering that meets the needs of our clients. So we've got lots of aspirations in terms of growth and opportunities, and looking forward to them, albeit that COVID has created a completely new environment. I think one of the other things that's really changed in the last 6 months or so is the extent to which the digitization and efficiency issues have been forced on companies like ourselves as a consequence of COVID. And we've been really excited about the way we've managed to pivot our business into one that was very much a manual and paper-based business in March, and is now very much an online digitized business, but one which looks to capitalize on the best of traditional real estate in terms of relationships that our agents have with their clients, backed up by a technology back office infrastructure and efficiency opportunity.
And I think one of the big things, Andrew, that we are finding is there isn't a single industry that I can think of at the top of my head that hasn't had to adapt to the effects of COVID. I think so many of us have found that we needed to adapt or essentially die. And I mean, obviously we're not, interested in not being able to live through the COVID era, trying to find various solutions that were going to help us live in a COVID era and start thinking how a post-COVID era would look like. I think there's probably even a time when we got tired of, the new normal, because it stopped being new. It ended up being the normal. And I think now probably the boring phrase is a post-COVID world that perhaps we can slowly start thinking about. I mean, the vaccine has already started being administered, or one of the vaccines has already started being administered. So perhaps we could already start thinking of what that post-COVID world may look like. Although I doubt it will ever, certainly in the short term, get to a fully post-COVID era. And we certainly know that we're not going to go back to the way things are. And I don't think anybody's interested in going back to the way things are, which probably leads me to, my next question, Andrew, which is what we can then expect. Firstly, let's look at what we could potentially expect from the property market in the future. Certainly if we look at, in South Africa, let's say in 2021, so the next year, perhaps even up to 3 years, what do you predict we could potentially see in the South African property space in the next year to 3 years?
So I think probably the biggest question to answer is the extent to which interest rates are going to stay in a historically low environment. And I think certainly for the foreseeable future, it would seem that we are in a low interest rate band. I think it's unrealistic to expect that interest rates are not going to move in some direction. I don't think they're going to stay where they are forever, but I do think we're in a low interest rate environment for the foreseeable future, and that therefore represents a continuation of the existing trend that we've seen in the last couple of months post-lockdown, which I think provides a really exciting opportunity for the property market next year. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of months. I think we've seen the market come out of the gates very strongly post-lockdown. We thought that was going to slow down. It hasn't slowed down. The market's still been very active, and it's going to be interesting to see how long that carries on for before there's any kind of change. I think the other thing that we've seen is that the middle and top end of the market have certainly had a price correction, and I think are heading towards what's a correct balance between supply and demand. And so I think we're going to start to see that market move again. But that's got to be underpinned by the extent to which the pain that's been predicted in the economy, and in particular the South African environment, still hasn't really materialized in a significant way. And whether that's going to, in fact, play itself out next year or not. So the predicted distress, and in particular housing distress from the bank's point of view, we haven't seen that really play itself out in the market yet, and that may still have a significant effect on the market. It may in fact have a positive effect on the market because there is a shortage of stock at the moment in the under 2 million rand price bracket. So that's going to be interesting to see. And then of course there's all of the macroeconomic factors that we've got to take into account. There's a question mark over sovereign debt and our ability to repay that. And I think that the macroeconomic factors, are to some extent certainly out of our control. But there's no question that this pandemic has caused a massive amount of infrastructure, of money to be spent on dealing with the virus, and that's got to be paid for somehow. And so I think it would be naive to expect that the future is just a rosy one and that there's no downside possibility. There certainly is a downside possibility, and I think one of the things we've learned from COVID is that it's really difficult to predict accurately. So if ever there was a challenge around crystal ball gazing, this is probably the ultimate challenge in terms of trying to accurately predict what is out there. I think one just needs, from a business perspective, to continually try and protect the downside so that one can have a sustainable business regardless of what is thrown at one, and hope for the best in terms of the upside, but make sure you've got the downside covered.
Andrew, earlier on, we're giving tips to first-time home buyers. One of the questions that we get asked here quite a lot comes from, viewers who already have that first property. Some even have one investment property, and they're looking at potentially scaling their property portfolio. So adding that third, fourth, or even fifth property in their property portfolio. Any tips you'd like to share to the viewers who are looking at, adding additional properties to their property portfolio, about the sort of best ways to navigate looking firstly holistically at their property portfolio, and then of course ways to steadily grow their property portfolios?
Yeah, so I think, as I alluded to earlier, I think the best advice I can give is to make sure that wherever you find yourself, you look for a trusted advisor, somebody who has the attributes, who can provide you with expert information, credible information, and information that will allow you to make good decisions, whether you are buying or selling. Because I think that is critically what is needed in the hands of a layman whose business is not property, to be able to make a good, informed decision in order to advance their cause in terms of maximizing the property opportunity. The opportunities are there, the information is there, the ability to access it is there. And so I would say that the critical thing is to find the right advisors or advisor who will give you that information and allow you to make the best decisions.
Well, Andrew, before I let you go, certainly ask you to give us a bit of a forecast about what we can expect in the property sector in the coming years. What can we then expect from Pam Golding Properties in the coming years?
Yeah, so we've got a number of exciting plans in terms of growth and expansion of our business, as I alluded to earlier. We're looking to grow a number of parts of our business. We've got negotiations that are ongoing in a number of African countries. We want to expand our international offering to make sure that it provides a comprehensive set of services to all South Africans and Africans who are looking to invest either in the continent or abroad. We've got a very successful international investment business, which looks to provide opportunities in places like London and Portugal and the US. We've got a alternative residency business that looks to provide residency options like the Golden Visa program in Portugal. And at the same time, we're always looking to attract the best talent we can in terms of providing our clients with the best possible service wherever they are. So we're very excited about the future of the group. We've got very ambitious growth plans and actually looking forward to next year very much in terms of what it represents.
Well, that's a great note to end it on. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And that is Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the CEO of Pam Golding Property Group. And of course, that brings us to an end of our conversation this evening. We have been having the 2020 property year in review with Pam Golding Properties. We do hope that you found this one very insightful, especially as you start planning for your 2021 property goals and making sure that you best understand where you are and certainly where you want to be going with your property portfolio. That's it from me, Zama and the rest of the Private Property Podcast team. We're back on your screen tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Julia Chen. I'm a restaurateur living in the Cape Town City Bowl. My restaurant, Hallelujah, is situated right in the heart of the city. Over the last few years, the influx of young professionals has created so many new and exciting things to see and do. The rejuvenation of the city has been something really special to experience. There are some really beautiful suburbs in our neighborhood. Nestled below the iconic Table Mountain lies Oranjezig and Tamboerskloof, filled with unique and beautiful homes. There's such a young vibe in the city with an incredible blend of diverse cultures catering to everybody's desire. Within the city, there are so many genuine and passionate people, and you'll find them in places like the Woodstock Exchange, offering everything from handcrafted works of art to a culinary experience hard to forget. For those who enjoy the outdoors, Lion's Head and Table Mountain are phenomenal places to explore. Living in the City Bowl has definitely given me my dream lifestyle, and this is my neighborhood.